The dust kicked up beneath Jessie Turner's worn boots as the stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the Las Vegas, Nevada trading post. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her small carpet bag, everything she owned in the world packed inside along with the newspaper advertisement that had brought her to this sun-scorched corner of Nevada territory in the summer of 1878. "Last stop, miss," the driver called down, already busy with the mail pouches. Jessie stepped down onto the hard, packed dirt, squinting against the harsh sunlight. At 24, she was no stranger to hard work or disappointment, but the death of her father 3 months prior had left her with nothing but debts and memories back in Missouri. The ranch job advertisement had seemed like Providence room, board and wages at the Double Circle Ranch, 10 miles outside Las Vegas. "You waiting for someone?" asked the station master, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "I need transportation to the Double Circle," Jessie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm expected." The station master raised an eyebrow. "Double Circle? That's Vance Fuller's spread. Not sure he's expecting a—" He paused, taking in her simple traveling dress and determined expression. "I have this." Jessie handed him the folded newspaper. "They advertised for a ranch hand. I've been hired by mail." The station master's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "Well, I'll be. Fuller's expecting a J. Turner all right, but I don't think he figured on I can work as hard as any man," Jessie interrupted, her chin lifting. The familiar argument was one she'd had her entire life, working alongside her father on their small farm. "I'm sure you can, miss," the station master said, not unkindly. "But the Double Circle isn't just any ranch. It's the biggest operation in these parts, and Fuller runs it tight. He lost his wife 5 years back, and he's been particular ever since." A voice called from behind them. "You J. Turner." Jessie turned to see a boy of about 16, lanky and sun-browned, sitting atop a wagon loaded with supplies. "I am," she replied. "I'm Tommy," the boy said. "I work for Mr. Fuller. He sent me to fetch supplies and the new hand." His eyes widened slightly as he took her in. "Madam, are you sure I'm J. Turner?" she repeated firmly. "And yes, I'm sure." Tommy shrugged. "Well, it ain't my place to say who Mr. Fuller hires. You can ride up front with me." Jessie handed her bag to Tommy, who stowed it in the wagon bed, then climbed up beside him. As they pulled away from the station, she could feel the stares of the townspeople. A woman heading to work as a ranch hand wasn't common, but she'd been doing a man's work all her life. The road out of Las Vegas quickly gave way to open country, a vast expanse of sagebrush, desert, and distant mountains shimmering in the heat. Tommy remained quiet for most of the journey, only occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of information about the territory. "That there's the edge of Double Circle land," Tommy finally said as they crested a rise. Below them stretched a broad valley cradled by rocky hills, a creek cutting through its center. Cattle dotted the landscape, and Jessie could make out buildings clustered near a stand of cottonwoods. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Biggest ranch in the county," Tommy said with evident pride. "Mr. Fuller runs near 2,000 head of cattle now, started with almost nothing after the war." As they drew closer, Jessie took in the details of what would be her new home, a large main house built of timber and stone, a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Several men worked in the yard, and she could see others on horseback in the distance. Tommy pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "Wait here. I'll fetch Mr. Fuller." Jessie remained in the wagon, her heart pounding as she observed the activity around her. A group of cowboys were breaking horses in a nearby corral, their whoops and the thunder of hooves filling the air. Two Mexican women carried baskets from the main house to what appeared to be a wash house. Tommy emerged from the main house, followed by a tall man whose presence immediately drew Jesse's attention. Even from a distance, his authority was evident in his bearing. He wore simple work clothes, a faded blue shirt, dusty trousers, and worn boots, but moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. As he approached the wagon, Jesse could see his features more clearly. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his current stern expression indicated. When his eyes met hers, Jessie felt a jolt of awareness that caught her off guard. Those eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, widened with surprise, then narrowed. "You're Jay Turner." His voice was deep with a slight rasp. "Jesse Turner," she confirmed, straightening her spine. "I believe you were expecting me, Mr. Fuller." "I was expecting a man," he replied bluntly. "Your advertisement didn't specify gender, sir. It asked for someone who could cook, clean, tend livestock, and wasn't afraid of hard work." She met his gaze steadily. "I can do all those things." Vance Fuller's jaw tightened. "This is cattle country, Miss Turner. The work is hard, dangerous, and no place for a woman," she finished for him. "Mr. Fuller, I've been running a farm since I was 14. I can rope, ride, and shoot. I can mend fences and birth calves. I need this job, and you need a worker." Several of the hands had stopped their tasks to watch the exchange, though they pretended not to. Vance seemed to notice their attention and frowned. "Come inside," he said abruptly, turning toward the house. Jessie climbed down from the wagon, brushed the dust from her skirt, and followed him. The main house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, its interior surprisingly cool after the heat outside. The furnishings were simple but solid: a large table with chairs, a stone fireplace, sturdy sofas, and bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised her. Vance gestured for her to sit at the table while he remained standing, arms crossed over his chest. "Your letter said you had experience," he said. "Explain." Jessie took a deep breath. "My father and I ran a small farm in Missouri. When my mother died 10 years ago, I took over the household duties and continued to help with the farm work. After my father was injured 3 years back, I did most of the heavy labor myself. I can handle horses, cattle, and basic veterinary care. I can cook for a crowd, preserve food, and keep accounts." "And why are you in Nevada instead of Missouri?" Her chin lifted slightly. "My father passed this spring. The farm was mortgaged and the bank took everything. I needed work, and your advertisement offered fair wages and a place to live." Something in Vance's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice gentler than before. He ran a hand through his hair, seeming to consider his options. "The position is for general ranch work and to help Mrs. Hernandez with the cooking for the hands," he finally said. "You'd be expected to pull your weight like anyone else here." "I don't expect special treatment," Jessie assured him. "The men might not take kindly to working alongside a woman," Vance warned. "Then that's their problem, not mine," she replied. "I don't need them to like me, Mr. Fuller. I just need to do my job." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face before disappearing. "Room and board plus $20 a month," he said. "Standard hours are sunup to sundown with longer days during roundup and branding. Sundays are half days unless there's an emergency." "Those terms are acceptable," Jessie said, trying to hide her relief. It was more money than she'd hoped for. "There's a small cabin behind the main house," Vance continued. "It was the foreman's quarters before we built the new one. It's nothing fancy, but it's private. You can stay there rather than the bunkhouse. Jessie nodded, grateful she wouldn't have to fight that particular battle. You'll start tomorrow, Vance said. Mrs. Hernandez will show you around the kitchen tonight and explain the meal schedule. He fixed her with a steady gaze. I'm giving you a chance, Miss Turner, but I won't hesitate to send you packing if you can't keep up. I understand, Mr. Fuller, and I prefer to be called Jessie. Very well, Jessie, he nodded once. Welcome to the double circle, Vance called for Mrs. Hernandez, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who clucked over Jessie's thin frame and insisted she needed feeding before anything else. As Mrs. Hernandez led her to the kitchen, Jessie caught Vance watching them, his expression unreadable. By the end of her first week at the double circle, Jessie had established a routine. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Hernandez prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent the morning tending to the kitchen garden, gathering eggs, and helping with the endless washing and mending that a ranch of this size generated. In the afternoons, Vance assigned her to various tasks around the ranch, mending tack, helping the farrier, sorting calves. The work was hard but satisfying, though she was acutely aware of the eyes watching her, waiting for her to fail. Some of the men, like old Pedro who managed the horses and Tommy who had first brought her to the ranch, were openly friendly. Others maintained a distant politeness. A few, particularly a wiry hand named Davis, made no effort to hide their resentment of her presence. Women are bad luck on a ranch, she overheard Davis telling another cowboy one evening. Mark my words, she'll bring nothing but trouble. Despite the challenges, Jessie was determined to prove herself. Each night she collapsed into her bed in the small cabin, muscles aching but spirit unbroken. The cabin itself was simple, just one room with a bed, table, chair, and small stove, but it was the first place that had been truly hers alone, and she took pride in keeping it neat. On her 8th day at the ranch, Vance approached her as she was hanging laundry. "Can you ride?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir." "Then saddle up. I need an extra hand checking the north pasture fences." Jessie quickly finished hanging the sheet she was holding. Now, he confirmed, already walking toward the stables. She hurried after him, excitement mingling with apprehension. This was a test. She knew her first real chance to prove she belonged in the field rather than just around the house. Pedro helped her saddle a steady bay mare named Penny, watching with approval as Jessie checked the cinch and bridle without prompting. When she mounted smoothly and gathered the reins with practiced hands, he nodded. "You ride well, señorita," he observed. "My father believed everyone should know how," she replied with a small smile. Vance appeared on his own horse, a powerful black gelding, and raised an eyebrow at her divided riding skirt. "Practical," was all he said before turning his horse toward the north pasture. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of birds. Jessie found herself stealing glances at Vance. In the week since her arrival, their interactions had been limited to brief discussions about work assignments. He was unfailingly fair but distant, and she had begun to wonder if he regretted hiring her. "My father wore that same expression when checking his fields," she said, breaking the silence. "Like he was reading a book only he could see." Vance glanced at her, surprise momentarily replacing his usual reserve. "A rancher learns to read the land," he said. "You can see problems before they become disasters if you know what to look for." "What are you looking for today?" she asked. "Weak spots in the fence line, signs of predators, water levels in the creek." He pointed toward a distant ridge. "We've had reports of rustlers working the territory. I want to make sure they're not eyeing our stock." Jessie nodded, understanding the seriousness of the threat. Cattle rustling was more than theft, it could destroy a ranch's livelihood. As they reached the fence line, Vance dismounted to check a section where the wire appeared loose. Jessie did the same, taking tools from her saddlebag without being asked. "You come prepared," Vance observed as she handed him wire cutters. "My father always said half of farm work is fixing what broke yesterday," she replied. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "Stubborn as the day is long, but wise." They worked together to repair the fence, falling into an efficient rhythm. Jessie was conscious of Vance watching her technique, but she handled the barbed wire with practiced ease, her gloved hands quick and sure. "Where did you learn to work wire like that?" Vance asked as they remounted. "We couldn't afford to hire help on our farm," she explained. "If something needed doing, we learned to do it ourselves." They continued along the fence line, stopping occasionally to make repairs. By midday, they had reached a small creek where Vance suggested they rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Hernandez had packed, seated on a fallen log, sharing bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. Jessie felt some of the tension between them ease. In this setting, away from the watchful eyes of the ranch, Vance seemed less the stern rancher and more simply a man, one who clearly loved his land and knew every inch of it. "How did you come to own the double circle?" she asked as they ate. Vance was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "I came west after the war with nothing but the clothes on my back and nightmares that wouldn't quit," he said. "Worked as a cowhand, saved every penny. When old man Jenkins decided to sell this place, it was barely 500 acres. Then I scraped together enough for a down payment and promised him the rest in installments." "And you built all this," Jessie said, gesturing to the vast ranch lands around them. Something like pride flickered across his face. "Hard work and some luck with the weather. The railroad coming through helped. Suddenly, eastern markets were open to us." He paused. "My wife, Sarah, was a big part of it. She had a head for figures that kept us from overextending in the early years." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife, and Jessie treaded carefully. "Mrs. Hernandez mentioned that she passed away." Vance's expression closed again. 5 years ago, fever." He stood abruptly. "We should keep moving if we want to finish the north section today." They mounted up and continued their inspection in silence, but Jessie felt she understood a little more about the man beside her. Loss had shaped them both, though in different ways. As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Vance frowned at the sky. "Storm's coming in faster than I expected. We need to head back." They turned their horses toward the ranch, but the storm was moving quickly, the wind picking up and carrying the scent of rain. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a rumble of thunder that made the horses nervous. "There's a line shack about a mile ahead," Vance called over the rising wind. "We can wait it out there." They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the storm caught them before they reached the shelter. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, soaking them within minutes. By the time the small wooden structure came into view, they were both drenched. Vance dismounted first and quickly led both horses into the lean-to attached to the cabin. Jessie followed him inside the one-room shack, shivering as water dripped from her clothes onto the wooden floor. The interior was spare but functional: a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Vance immediately set to work starting a fire in the stove while Jessie wrung water from her hair and skirt. "There are some dry clothes in that trunk," Vance said, nodding toward a wooden chest. "They'll be too big, but they're better than staying wet." Jessie found men's shirts and trousers in the trunk. "Turn your back," she requested, and Vance obliged, busying himself with the fire. She changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of the two large clothes. "You can turn around now," she said, hanging her wet garments on the back of a chair near the stove. Vance changed as well, and soon the small cabin was warming up, the stove casting a golden glow in the dim interior as rain pounded on the roof. "Looks like we're here for a while," Vance observed, checking the supplies. He found coffee, beans, and some dried beef. "At least we won't go hungry." Jesse took over preparing a simple meal while Vance tended to the horses. By the time he returned, she had coffee brewing and beans heating on the stove. "You didn't have to cook," he said, hanging his wet hat on a peg by the door. "It gives me something to do besides listen to the storm," she replied with a small smile. "I've never been fond of thunder." They ate in companionable silence, the small cabin growing cozy as the storm raged outside. Jesse was acutely aware of Vance's presence across the table, the way his damp hair curled slightly at his neck, the strength in his hands as he held his coffee cup. "How are you finding the work so far?" he asked unexpectedly. Jesse considered her answer. "Challenging," she admitted, "but good. I like having purpose again." "And the men, they treating you all right?" "Most are fair enough," she said diplomatically. Vance's eyes narrowed. "Davis giving you trouble?" Jesse was surprised he had noticed. "Nothing I can't handle." "If anyone crosses the line, I'll deal with it," she interrupted gently. "I've managed difficult men before, Mr. Fuller." "Vance," he corrected. "If we're going to be trapped in a line shack together, you might as well use my name." The simple invitation seemed to shift something between them. As the evening wore on, and the storm showed no signs of abating, they found themselves talking more freely. Vance told her about building the ranch, the challenges of the early years, the satisfaction of watching it grow. Jessie shared stories of her life in Missouri, her father's stubborn determination to make their small farm prosper despite the odds. "He sounds like a man I would have respected," Vance said when she described her father's refusal to sell their land to a neighboring farmer who had tried to force them out. "He would have liked you too," Jessie replied, surprised to realize it was true. Her father had been a good judge of character, and despite Vance's gruff exterior, she had seen enough of his fairness and integrity to know her father would have approved. Lightning flashed, closer now, illuminating the cabin in stark white light. Jessie flinched at the immediate crack of thunder that followed. "Still don't like storms?" Vance asked, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "Not since I was 10, she admitted. "Lightning struck our barn, we lost 2 horses." Understanding filled his eyes. "I'm not fond of them either. Too unpredictable." Another crash of thunder made the cabin tremble, and Jessie couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her. "Tell me more about Missouri," Vance said, clearly trying to distract her. "I passed through once before the war. Beautiful country." Grateful for the diversion, Jessie described the rolling hills and forests of her home state, the changing seasons, the small town where they had sold their produce. As she spoke, she noticed Vance watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "What?" she finally asked when he hadn't spoken for several minutes. "You don't talk like most women I've known," he said thoughtfully. "Is that good or bad? Just an observation." His eyes remained on her face. "You speak plainly, without the frills and niceties most women think necessary." "My father always said if you can't speak your mind clearly, you might as well not speak at all," Jessie replied with a slight smile. "A philosophy I share," Vance said, "though it's earned me a reputation for bluntness." "I'd rather blunt honesty than pretty lies," she told him. Something changed in Vance's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight relaxation of the perpetual tension in his shoulders. That's rare. The storm finally began to ease near midnight, the thunder growing more distant, the rain gentling to a steady patter on the roof. "You should take the bed," Vance said, rising to check the stove. "I'll use my bedroll on the floor." Jessie started to protest, but the firm set of his jaw told her it would be futile. She settled onto the narrow bed, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her, her mind too aware of Vance's presence just a few feet away. "Vance," she whispered after several minutes of listening to the rain. His voice came from the darkness. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Not many would have." There was a long pause before he replied. "Get some sleep, Jessie. Dawn comes early." When Jessie woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. She sat up quickly, disoriented until she remembered the storm and their shelter in the lined shack. Vance was already up, his bedroll neatly packed away and coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," he said, handing her a cup. "Storm's past. We should head back soon." Jessie accepted the coffee gratefully, taking a moment to collect herself. In the clear light of morning, the easy companionship of the previous evening seemed like a dream. Vance was once again the reserved ranch owner, his expression giving nothing away. After a quick breakfast, they saddled the horses and began the ride back to the ranch. The storm had left the land refreshed, wildflowers already lifting their heads in the morning sun, the air crisp and clean. "The north fence line is secure," Vance said as they rode. "Next week we'll need to check the eastern border. There's a section near the ridge that often washes out after heavy rain." "I'd be happy to help," Jessie offered. Vance glanced at her. "You did well yesterday," he said, the simple words of praise warming her more than they should have. They rode into the ranch yard mid-morning to find activity in full swing. Several of the hands looked up as they approached, expressions ranging from relief to curiosity. "Was starting to wonder if you two got caught in that storm," Pedro said as he came to take the horses. "We waited it out in the north line shack," Vance replied matter-of-factly. Jessie was acutely aware of the speculation in some of the men's eyes as they took in her borrowed clothes, and the fact that she and Vance had spent the night away from the ranch. Davis, in particular, was watching with barely concealed contempt. "I should change and get back to work," she said quietly to Vance. He nodded, his expression once again unreadable. "Report to Mrs. Hernandez. She'll have plenty for you to do after the storm." As Jessie walked to her cabin, she could feel eyes following her and hear the murmur of conversation. She held her head high, refusing to show any sign that their speculation bothered her, though her cheeks burned with awareness of how the situation must look. Inside her cabin, she quickly changed back into her own clothes, now dry though somewhat wrinkled. As she was buttoning her blouse, a knock came at the door. "Just a moment," she called, hastily finishing with her buttons before opening the door to find Mrs. Hernandez standing there, her kind face worried. "Are you all right, Mija?" the older woman asked, stepping inside and closing the door. "When you didn't come back last night, we got caught in the storm and had to stay at a lined shack," Jessie explained. "Nothing happened, Mrs. Hernandez." The housekeeper patted her hand. "I know that, child. You and Mr. Vance are both honorable people, but the men talk, you understand." "Let them talk," Jessie said with more confidence than she felt. "We did nothing wrong," Mrs. Hernandez sighed. "Just be careful, Jessie. Mr. Vance is a good man, but he has not opened his heart since his Sarah died, and you are still finding your place here." "It was just a storm," Jessie insisted. "Nothing more." But as she followed Mrs. Hernandez to the kitchen to begin the day's work, she couldn't help wondering if something had indeed changed during those hours in the lined shack. The way Vance had looked at her, the ease of their conversation, The comfort she had found in his presence all suggested a shift in their relationship that both excited and frightened her. The next few weeks brought a rhythm to Jesse's life at the Double Circle. The incident at the line shack gradually faded from ranch gossip as newer topics took precedence: a mountain lion sighted near the East Ridge, preparations for the upcoming cattle drive to the railhead, the arrival of new breeding stock from Texas. Jesse's role on the ranch expanded as Vance increasingly called on her for tasks beyond the house and garden. She helped with branding calves, rode fence lines, and even joined a small group checking for strays in the high pastures. Her skills and work ethic gradually earned the respect of most of the hands. Though Davis remained coldly hostile, Vance himself remained an enigma. Some days he sought her out, assigning her to work alongside him checking water sources or moving cattle. Other days he barely acknowledged her presence, retreating into the taciturn persona that the ranch hands were more familiar with. One evening in late August, Jessie was returning from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs when she heard raised voices from the barn. Curious, she set down her basket and moved closer. Recognizing Vance's deep tones and another voice, Davis, she realized with a frown. "Don't care what you think," Vance was saying, his voice tight with anger. "She works here same as you and she's proven herself." "The men don't like it," Davis insisted. "A woman has no place doing a man's job, and living alone in that cabin, it ain't proper." "Her living arrangements are none of your concern," Vance replied coldly. "And if the men have complaints, they can bring them to me directly instead of whispering behind my back. People are starting to talk in town," Davis pressed. "About you and her. After that night in the line shack." "Enough." Vance's voice cracked like a whip. "Miss Turner is an employee of this ranch and will be treated with the respect that deserves. If you can't manage that, Davis, you can collect your pay and move on." Jessie backed away silently, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. She retrieved her egg basket and continued to the kitchen, her mind churning with what she had overheard. She hadn't realized the rumors had spread to town, though she supposed she shouldn't be surprised. Las Vegas might be growing, but it was still small enough for gossip to travel quickly. She was arranging the eggs in the pantry when Vance entered the kitchen, his expression stormy. He stopped short when he saw her. "Jessie." He seemed to struggle for words. "I didn't expect to find you here this late. Mrs. Hernandez asked me to bring in the eggs for tomorrow's breakfast," she explained, studying his face. The anger was still there in the tightness around his mouth, the furrow between his brows. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," he said shortly, then sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "No, that's not true. Davis is causing trouble." "I know," she said quietly. "I heard some of it." Vance's eyes narrowed. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know he doesn't approve of my presence here and that there's talk in town." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm sorry if I've caused difficulties for you, Vance." He shook his head. "You haven't done anything wrong. Davis is a fool and gossip is the favorite pastime of people with empty lives." "Still," she persisted, "if my being here is becoming a problem, it's not," he interrupted firmly. "You're a valuable part of this ranch, Jessie. I won't let small-minded talk change that." The conviction in his voice warmed her, but worry still nagged. "What if it affects your business dealings? Your standing in the community?" Vance moved closer, his expression softening. "Do you know what I told Davis? That you've earned your place here, and you have." His eyes held hers. "You work harder than men twice your size. You never complain, even when the job is dirty or difficult. The herd is healthier since you started mixing that new feed supplement. And Mrs. Hernandez says she hasn't had such good help in the kitchen since Sarah." He broke off, looking surprised at himself for mentioning his wife so casually. Jessie felt a strange tightness in her chest at being compared to Sarah, unsure if it was a compliment or something more complicated. "Thank you," she said simply. Vance nodded, seeming to regain his composure. "The cattle drive to the railhead starts next week. With most of the men gone, there'll be plenty to do here." "I'll manage," she assured him. "I know you will." He hesitated, then added, "I'm leaving Pedro in charge, but if there's anything you need, anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." "I'll be fine, Vance," she said with a small smile. "Go sell your cattle for a good price and come back safely." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth she rarely saw, before he nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "Jessie?" "Yes. When I get back, I'd like to talk to you about a more permanent position here, head of household staff with a raise in salary." Surprise flooded her. "I thank you. That's very generous." "It's what you've earned," he said simply, and then he was gone, leaving Jessie staring after him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper she wasn't ready to examine. The day the cattle drive departed was organized chaos. 50 steers and 15 cowboys, including Vance, prepared for the 4-day journey to the railhead. Jessie helped pack provisions and watched from the corral fence as the massive herd began moving out, dust rising in clouds beneath hundreds of hooves. Vance rode over to where she stood, his black gelding prancing with excitement. "Remember what I said," he told her. "Anything you need, ask Pedro. We'll be back in about 2 weeks if all goes well." "Good luck," she replied, shading her eyes to see him better against the morning sun. "I'll keep everything running smoothly here." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment before he turned and rode to the front of the column. Jessie watched until the last rider disappeared over the rise, then turned back to the ranch. With most of the men gone, the yard seemed unnaturally quiet. The first week passed quickly. Jessie divided her time between helping Mrs. Hernandez in the main house and working with Pedro and the few hands who had remained behind. Without the full crew to cook for, she had more time to tackle projects that had been set aside: mending tack, organizing the storerooms, taking inventory of supplies for the coming winter. She was in the barn late one afternoon, checking a mare that was close to foaling, when she heard a horse approaching at speed. Stepping outside, she saw a rider coming hard for the ranch, and her heart clenched with worry. It was Tommy, who had gone with the cattle drive. "Miss Jessie." He called as soon as he was within earshot. "Where's Pedro?" "Checking the north pasture," she replied, running to meet him. "What's happened?" Tommy dismounted, his young face grave. "Rustlers hit us 2 nights ago. They stampeded the herd and made off with about 20 head in the confusion." "Was anyone hurt?" Jessie asked, fear constricting her throat. "Jim took a bullet in the shoulder. Mr. Fuller sent me back to get Pedro and anyone who can shoot. The rest continued to the railhead with most of the herd, but Mr. Fuller and 3 others went after the rustlers." The fear in Jessie's chest turned to ice. "How many rustlers?" "At least 6 that we saw," Tommy replied grimly. "Maybe more." Pedro returned within the hour, and Tommy quickly relayed Vance's instructions. Pedro wasted no time organizing the remaining hands. By sundown, he and 4 others were ready to ride out, armed and provisioned for several days. "You stay here with Mrs. Hernandez and young Tommy," Pedro told Jessie. "Keep the ranch running." "I'm coming with you," Jessie stated firmly. "I can shoot and track as well as any of you." Pedro shook his head. "Mr. Fuller would have my hide if I let you ride into danger." "Vance is already in danger," she argued. "You need every gun you can get, and I'm not staying behind to wonder if you're all safe." Pedro studied her determined expression, then sighed. "You are as stubborn as he is," he muttered. "Fine, but you stay behind me at all times, comprehend? And if there is shooting, you take cover." Jessie nodded, already turning to prepare her own horse and gather her father's old rifle from her cabin. Mrs. Hernandez protested when told of the plan, but Jessie was resolute. "I can't stay here doing nothing when Vance might need help," she explained as she changed into her riding clothes. Mrs. Hernandez crossed herself. "Dios mío, you love him, don't you, Mija?" The question caught Jessie off guard. He's my employer," she stammered. The older woman shook her head, a knowing smile touching her lips despite her worry. "Your eyes say different. Be careful, Jessie. Not just of bullets." Before Jessie could respond, Tommy called that the others were ready to leave. With a quick embrace for Mrs. Hernandez, Jessie hurried out to join the rescue party. They rode through the night, following Tommy's directions to where the rustlers had attacked the herd. At dawn, they found the spot where Vance and the others had separated from the main group to pursue the stolen cattle. Pedro studied the tracks carefully. "They headed into the foothills," he said, pointing toward the rugged country to the east. "Smart, harder to follow, more places to hide. But Mr. Fuller knows this land better than anyone," one of the hands pointed out. "So do the rustlers, if it's who I think it is," Pedro replied grimly. "The Cardoza brothers have been causing trouble in these parts for years." They continued tracking throughout the day, the sign growing fresher as they followed the winding trail through increasingly difficult terrain. By late afternoon, they had entered a maze of narrow canyons and rocky outcroppings. "We're close," Pedro whispered as they paused in the shadow of a tall cliff. "The tracks are only a few hours old." Jessie's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Somewhere ahead was Vance, possibly wounded or worse. She tightened her grip on her rifle, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the terrifying possibilities her mind conjured. As the sun began to set, they heard the distant crack of gunfire echoing through the canyons. "This way," Pedro urged, leading them toward the sound. They rode as fast as the rough terrain would allow, the gunfire growing louder and more frequent. Rounding a bend in the canyon, they came upon a scene of chaos. Ahead, a small box canyon was filled with milling cattle. At its entrance, a fallen tree and scattered boulders formed a makeshift barricade, behind which Jessie could see movement. "There," she cried, pointing to where a man's hat was visible for an instant before disappearing again. The rapid exchange of gunfire indicated that Vance and his men were pinned down behind the barricade, with the rustlers taking cover among the rocks on the canyon walls. Pedro quickly deployed their small force, sending 2 men to circle around to the right while he and another would approach from the left. "You stay here with the horses," he told Jessie firmly. "If things go badly, ride back to the ranch for more help." Jessie nodded, but as soon as Pedro and the others moved out, she led the horses to a sheltered spot and tied them securely. Then, rifle in hand, she began making her way up the side of the canyon, using the boulders and scrub brush for cover. Her plan was simple: reach a high point where she could see the rustlers' positions and provide covering fire for Vance and the others. The climb was treacherous, loose stones threatening to give away her position with every step, but she moved carefully, drawing on all the skills her father had taught her about moving quietly through rough country. Finally reaching a ledge with a clear view of the canyon, Jessie settled herself behind a large rock and surveyed the scene below. She could now make out 3 figures behind the barricade: Vance and 2 others, one of whom appeared to be wounded. Across from them, at least 5 rustlers were spread out among the rocks, periodically firing down at the trapped men. Jessie took a deep breath, steadied her rifle on the rock, and took careful aim at the nearest rustler. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, insisting that a woman alone might someday need to defend herself. She had never thought to use those skills like this, but as she exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger, her hands were steady. The shot echoed through the canyon, and the rustler jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. Immediately, the others looked up in confusion, trying to locate this new threat. Jesse fired again, deliberately sending a bullet into the rock near another rustler's head, forcing him to duck for cover. Her diversion had the desired effect. From opposite sides of the canyon, Pedro and the others opened fire, catching the rustlers in a devastating crossfire. Behind the barricade, Vance and his men seized the opportunity to return fire with renewed vigor. The battle was brief, but intense. 2 rustlers fell, and another threw down his weapon in surrender. The remaining 2 attempted to escape up the canyon wall but were quickly captured by Pedro's men. As the shooting ceased, Jessie made her way carefully back down to the canyon floor, her heart racing. Through the settling dust, she could see Vance emerging from behind the barricade, his face streaked with dirt and what might have been blood. He was speaking urgently to Pedro, gesturing toward the wounded man being tended by one of the hands. Then his eyes found her, and even from a distance, she could see the shock and then the anger that transformed his features. He strode toward her, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded when he reached her, his voice hoarse. "I gave explicit instructions. I wasn't about to stay at the ranch while you might be killed," she interrupted, lifting her chin defiantly. "And it's a good thing I came, or you might still be pinned down behind that barricade." Vance stared at her, his anger warring with something else, relief perhaps, or admiration. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. "That was your shot." "From the ledge," she nodded. "Damn fine shooting," he admitted grudgingly. Then, as if unable to help himself, he reached out and grasped her shoulders, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "But you're bleeding." Vance glanced down at his arm where a dark stain spread across his sleeve. "Just a graze." Mason's in worse shape bullet in his leg. The next hours were a flurry of activity tending the wounded, securing the prisoners, and gathering the scattered cattle. A makeshift camp was established, and Jessie found herself pressed into service as a nurse, cleaning and bandaging wounds with supplies from the saddlebags. Vance's injury was indeed minor, though he winced as she cleaned the bullet graze on his upper arm. "You could have been killed," he said quietly as she worked, the others busy around the camp. "So could you," she replied, not looking up from her task. "I couldn't bear to sit safely at the ranch, not knowing." His hand caught hers, stilling her movements and forcing her to meet his eyes. "Why?" The simple question demanded a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to give, but the intensity of his gaze made evasion impossible. "Because you matter to me," she said softly. "More than an employer should." Something shifted in Vance's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she had never seen before. For a moment, she thought he might say more, but Pedro approached with news about the prisoners, and the moment was lost. The return journey to the ranch was slow, hampered by the wounded men and the recovered cattle. They arrived at the double circle 2 days later to find the main cattle drive had returned successfully from the railhead. The hands who had stayed with the herd greeted them with cheers when they heard about the capture of the notorious Cardoza brothers. In the days that followed, life at the ranch gradually returned to normal. The wounded men recovered under Mrs. Hernandez's care. The cattle settled back into their pastures, and the daily rhythm of ranch work resumed. Only between Jessie and Vance did something remain unresolved, a tension born of words spoken in the aftermath of danger and left hanging in the air between them. Vance seemed to be avoiding her, spending long days in the saddle checking the far reaches of his property, or closeted in his office with the ranch accounts. When their paths did cross, His manner was polite but distant, as if he regretted the moment of openness they had shared. A week after their return, Jessie was in the garden harvesting late summer vegetables when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Vance standing at the garden gate, his expression unreadable. "You have a moment?" he asked formally. Jessie nodded, setting aside her basket and brushing the dirt from her hands. Vance gestured toward a bench beneath an old apple tree at the edge of the garden, and she followed him there, her heart beating faster with each step. For a long moment after they sat, Vance said nothing, his eyes on the distant mountains. Jessie waited, sensing he was gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally began, his voice low. "About me mattering to you." "I meant it," she said simply. He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes searching her face. "When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused on building this ranch, making it successful because it was all I had left. I didn't expect," he paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I didn't expect to feel anything for anyone again." Jessie hardly dared breathe, afraid to break the spell of his unexpected openness. "But then you arrived," he continued, "with your determination and your straight talk and your refusal to be anything but exactly who you are. And something changed. For me too," she admitted softly. Vance reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they enclosed hers. "I'm not good at this, Jessie. I've spent 5 years keeping everyone at a distance. I don't know if I remember how to do anything else." "We could learn together," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. A smile rare and transformative touched his lips. "I'd like that." The autumn days that followed marked a gradual but unmistakable change in their relationship. They began taking meals together in the evenings after the hands had eaten, talking long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, the daily workings of the ranch. On Sundays, when the work was lighter, they rode together, Vance showing her the far corners of the double circle, places of particular beauty or significance that he had never shared with anyone else. The ranch hands noticed the shift, of course. Some, like Pedro and Tommy, seemed pleased by the development. Others were more reserved in their judgment, watching with curiosity as the boss's relationship with the female ranch hand evolved into something clearly more personal. Davis, who had returned from the cattle drive with a newfound respect for Jessie's shooting abilities, kept his opinions to himself. Mrs. Hernandez observed it all with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had seen what was coming before either party involved had recognized it themselves. "He smiles now," she commented to Jessie one evening as they prepared dinner. "Not just with his mouth but with his eyes. I have not seen that since before Sarah died." Jessie felt a warmth spread through her chest at the observation. "He's a good man," she said simply. "Yes, Mrs. Hernandez agreed. "And you are good for him. You challenge him, make him think, make him feel. This is what he has needed." As autumn deepened toward winter, Jessie found herself thinking more about the future. Vance had never formally renewed his offer of a permanent position as head of household staff, and she wondered if that was because their relationship had changed the terms of her employment in ways neither of them had fully addressed. The question was answered unexpectedly one crisp November evening. They had ridden to a high meadow that offered a spectacular view of the sunset painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. As they dismounted to watch the display, Vance seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jessie said, gesturing toward the horizon. "Yes," Vance agreed, though his eyes were on her face rather than the sunset. "Jessie, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it?" Vance took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your position at the ranch. The arrangement we discussed before head of household staff, it doesn't seem right anymore." Disappointment and confusion washed over her. "Oh, I see. No, I don't think you do," he said quickly, taking her hands in his. "What I'm trying to say badly is that I don't want you to work for me anymore. I want," he paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I want you to be my partner, in everything." Jessie stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Vance, I'm asking you to marry me," he said simply. "I love you, Jessie Turner. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you stood in my yard and refused to be sent away. I just didn't recognize it for what it was until much later." Joy bubbled up within her, making her laugh even as tears sprang to her eyes. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hands tightly. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Vance Fuller." The relief and happiness that transformed his face was beautiful to behold. Vance pulled her close, one hand cradling her cheek as he kissed her for the first time, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded with all the love she had been holding in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vance rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured. "Thank you for coming to my ranch, Jessie Turner." "Thank you for giving me a chance," she replied softly. "Even if you did think you were hiring a man," he laughed, the sound rich and uninhibited in a way she had never heard before. "Best mistake I ever made." They were married in the Las Vegas church 3 weeks later, with the entire ranch in attendance. Mrs. Hernandez wept openly, while Pedro beamed with pride as he stood as Vance's best man. Even Davis offered gruff congratulations at the celebration afterward, held in the ranch's main house, which was decorated with pine boughs and early winter berries. That night, as they stood together in what was now their bedroom, Jessie felt a curious mixture of nervousness and certainty. Vance seemed to sense her conflicting emotions, his touch gentle as he helped her remove the pins from her hair. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm not afraid," she told him, turning in his arms. "Just overwhelmed. A few months ago I had nothing, no home, no family, no future I could count on, and now I have everything." Vance's eyes darkened with emotion. "I'm the lucky one," he said huskily. "You brought life back to this place and to me." Their coming together was tender at first, then passionate as initial hesitancy gave way to deeper need. Afterward, lying in his arms as the fire burned low in the hearth, Jessie felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had ever known. "What are you thinking?" Vance asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," she replied honestly. Winter settled over the double circle, bringing shorter days and occasional snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Inside the main house, warmth and happiness prevailed as Jessie and Vance adjusted to married life. They worked side by side during the days running the ranch, remained a full-time commitment regardless of their changed relationship, and spent the evenings planning for the future. "I've been thinking about expanding," Vance told her one night as they sat before the fire. "Not just more cattle, but perhaps horses as well. There's good money in breeding stock for the army." Jessie nodded thoughtfully. "The south pasture would be ideal for horses, better grass, and more shelter from the winter winds." "Exactly what I was thinking," he said with a smile, still delighting in how perfectly their minds seemed to work together. "We could build new stables in the spring." The "we" warmed her every time he said it. This was no longer his ranch where she worked. It was their home, their future, their shared dream. Christmas came with a celebration larger than any the double circle had seen in years. Jessie insisted on gifts for all the hands, and the main house was filled with music and laughter as Pedro played his guitar, and Mrs. Hernandez taught some of the younger cowboys traditional Mexican dances. I haven't heard the house this alive since, Vance began, then stopped himself. Since Sarah was here, Jesse finished gently. They had reached a place where mentioning his first wife no longer brought pain, only quiet acknowledgement of a life well lived and properly mourned. Vance nodded. She would have liked you, he said thoughtfully. She always said this place needed more laughter. Jesse squeezed his hand, honored by the comparison. Then we'll make sure it never lacks for laughter again. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished under their combined leadership. Vance found that Jesse's practical farming knowledge complemented his ranching experience perfectly. She introduced new feed combinations that improved the health of the cattle, suggested crop rotations for the fields that supplied their hay, and reorganized the household accounts with an efficiency that even impressed Vance, who had always prided himself on his business acumen. The Hands, who had initially been skeptical of a woman's place on the ranch, now sought Jesse's opinion on matters ranging from treating horse ailments to settling disputes. She had earned their respect not just as the boss's wife, but as a knowledgeable and fair-minded person in her own right. In April, as the first wildflowers began to appear in the meadows, Jessie confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. When she told Vance, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy, wonder, and a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes as he gently placed a hand on her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression already gave her the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. "You've given me back everything I thought was lost forever, and now this miracle as well." The news spread quickly through the ranch, bringing congratulations and a new protectiveness from the Hands, who suddenly found reasons to take over Jessie's heavier tasks, despite her protests that she wasn't an invalid. "Let them fuss a little," Vance advised with a smile. "They care about you." "I know," she conceded, "but if one more cowboy tries to carry my basket of eggs, I might have to remind them that I was shooting rustlers not that long ago." Vance laughed and pulled her close. "That's my girl." As summer approached and Jessie's condition became more visible, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place of contentment. The desperate young woman who had stepped off the stage coach a year before, with nothing but determination and a newspaper advertisement, seemed like a different person altogether. She was in the garden one particularly warm afternoon, resting in the shade of the apple tree when Vance found her. He had been out since dawn, checking on a new herd of horses they had acquired for their breeding program. "There you are," he said, dropping onto the bench beside her. "Mrs. Hernandez said you were supposed to be napping." "I was restless," Jessie admitted, "and it's beautiful out here." Vance's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're beautiful," he corrected, placing a gentle hand on her rounded belly. "Both of you." Jessie covered his hand with her own, smiling as she felt the baby kick against his palm. "He knows his father's voice already." Vance raised an eyebrow. "You're sure it's a boy?" "Not certain," she admitted. "Just a feeling." Vance leaned in to kiss her softly. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved beyond measure." "I know," she whispered against his lips. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, watching the play of sunlight through the apple blossoms above them. Finally, Vance spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You remember what I said to you the first time we worked together, when we checked the north fence line?" Jessie smiled at the memory. "You told me to rest while you finished the repairs, said I'd worked hard enough." Vance nodded, his expression tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I was wrong that day. You weren't someone who needed protection or coddling. You are the strongest person I know. Not always, she admitted. Right now, for instance, I'm grateful for a moment of rest. Then rest with me, he said simply, drawing her against his side. We have all the time in the world. As the summer deepened, so did their connection. Jessie found that pregnancy, rather than limiting her involvement in ranch life, simply shifted her focus to different areas, planning for the coming winter, training a new housekeeper to assist Mrs. Hernandez, and overseeing the construction of the new stables that would house their expanding horse breeding operation. Vance marveled at her energy and insight, often remarking that the double circle had never run more smoothly despite its growth. They made decisions together, their complementary strengths creating a partnership that benefited not just themselves, but everyone who depended on the ranch for their livelihood. In early September, as the first hints of autumn touched the aspen trees in the high country, Jessie went into labor. The ranch doctor had been summoned days earlier as a precaution, and Mrs. Hernandez, who had assisted at dozens of births over the years, stayed close at hand. Vance, pacing anxiously outside the bedroom as was the custom, found the waiting nearly unbearable. Every cry from Jessie tore at his heart. Every hushed consultation between the doctor and Mrs. Hernandez filled him with dread. Pedro kept him company, offering quiet words of encouragement and occasionally a sip from a flask of whiskey to steady his nerves. After what seemed an eternity, the distinctive cry of a newborn pierced the air. Vance froze mid-step, his eyes flying to the bedroom door. Minutes later, Mrs. Hernandez emerged, her face wreathed in smiles. "A son, Mr. Fuller," she announced. "Strong and healthy, with a good set of lungs on him." Vance felt his knees weaken with relief. "And Jessie, tired but well," the older woman assured him. "She is asking for you." He entered the bedroom on unsteady legs, his eyes immediately finding Jessie propped against the pillows, her face flushed and damp with perspiration but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vance approached the bed in something like reverence, carefully sitting on its edge. When Jessie placed the baby in his arms, he felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. The infant was tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to already hold a hint of his mother's determination. "He's magnificent," Vance whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "What shall we call him?" "I thought perhaps James, after my father," Jessie suggested. "James Vance Fuller." "James," Vance repeated, testing the name. "It suits him. A strong name for a boy who will grow up on this land knowing its every hill and valley." Jessie smiled, reaching out to touch his face. "I love you, Vance Fuller." "And I love you," he replied, carefully returning the baby to her arms so he could lean in and kiss her forehead. "More than I ever thought possible. Thank you for our son, for our family." The news of young James's arrival spread quickly through the ranch and into Las Vegas. Visitors came bearing gifts and congratulations, neighboring ranchers, townspeople who did business with the Double Circle, even the territorial judge who happened to be passing through. All were welcomed, though Vance was careful to limit the time they spent with Jessie, protective of her need for rest. As autumn deepened toward winter once more, the Fuller family settled into a new routine. Jessie recovered her strength quickly, resuming many of her duties while finding a deep joy in motherhood. Vance took to fatherhood with a devotion that surprised even those who knew him best, often carrying little James with him around the ranch, pointing out cattle and horses to the attentive infant as if he already understood every word. "He'll be a rancher born and bred," Pedro observed with a smile as he watched Vance showing the baby a new foal one crisp November morning. "If that's what he chooses," Jessie replied. Vance and I agree he should follow his own path when the time comes. Pedro nodded approvingly. That is wise. But with parents like you too, I think young James will love this land as you do. The first snow of winter came early that year, blanketing the double circle in white just before Thanksgiving. Standing at the window of the main house, James sleeping peacefully in her arms, Jessie watched the familiar landscape transform into something magical and new. Vance found her there, wrapping his arms around both her and their son, his chin resting on her shoulder as they gazed out at their land. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, careful not to wake the baby. "That I came here with nothing but hope and determination," she replied thoughtfully. "And now I have everything I never dared to dream of." "You earned it all," Vance assured her, turning her gently to face him. "Every bit of happiness we've built together." Jessie smiled up at him, this man who had first seen her as just another ranch hand but had come to love her for exactly who she was. "Remember what you said to me that day in the garden?" she asked. "When I was pregnant and resting under the apple tree," Vance's eyes softened with the memory. "I said you'd worked hard enough and to rest with me. And I told you I wasn't always strong," she continued. "The truth is, I'm strongest when I'm with you. We make each other better." Vance kissed her then, a tender expression of all they had become to each other. James stirred between them, and they both looked down at their son with matching expressions of wonder and love. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and silent, while inside the warmth of family and home created a sanctuary against the winter's chill. The double circle, once just a struggling ranch, had become the center of a life neither Jessie nor Vance could have imagined when fate first brought them together. In the years that followed, the ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. 2 more children joined the family, a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named for both their mothers, and another son, Thomas Pedro, whose name honored those who had stood by them from the beginning. Jessie never forgot her humble beginnings or the journey that had led her to the double circle. Each spring, when new hands were hired for the busy season, she made a point of reviewing the applications herself, sometimes choosing candidates others might have overlooked: a young widow with children to support, an older man whose experience outweighed his physical limitations, a former soldier trying to rebuild his life. "Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves," she would tell Vance, who never disagreed. He, better than most, knew how a single opportunity could change the course of a life. As Las Vegas grew from a small trading post to a proper town, the Fullers became respected community leaders, helping to establish the territory's first proper school, contributing to the building of a new church, and advocating for fair water rights that benefited small farmers as well as large ranchers. Through it all, the foundation of their success remained the partnership they had forged that first year, a bond built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had begun with a woman determined to work, and a man who learned to open his heart again. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, with their children tucked safely in bed, and the ranch quiet under a blanket of stars, Vance and Jessie sat together on the porch of the main house, his arm around her shoulders as they enjoyed the peace of the evening. 10 years, Vance mused, his voice soft with wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you climbed down from that wagon, ready to take on the world." Jessie smiled, leaning into his embrace. "And sometimes it feels like I've always been here, like this land and this life were waiting for me all along." "They were," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We all were." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley that had become their kingdom. Behind them, the solid walls of the house they had made a home sheltered their sleeping children. Before them stretched the future as vast and promising as the western sky above them, filled with stars that would guide their way through whatever adventures still awaited. "I love you, Jesse Fuller," Vance said, his voice carrying all the depth of feeling that had grown between them over the years. "And I love you," she replied, turning to meet his gaze in the moonlight. "Today, tomorrow, always." His kiss was as tender as the first they had shared, yet rich with the history they had written together, a love story that had begun with work and rest, and had become the cornerstone of a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The double circle, once just a name on a map, had become the center of a universe built on love, determination, and the courage to reach for happiness even when it seemed beyond grasp. And for Jessie Turner Fuller, who had once had nothing, it was everything she had never known to wish for and all she would ever need.